There is a small village on the northern tip of Okinawa, Japan, called Ojimai. It has a population of roughly 3,000 people. It has no major industry, no famous landmarks, no particular reason to appear on a map of the world. What it has is this: the highest life expectancy of any community on Earth. Men in Ojimai live on average into their mid-80s. Women into their early 90s. But more striking than the numbers is what you find when you go there, which the two authors of this book did, armed with notebooks and a Japanese translator. For an extended research visit that produced 100 interviews with the village's oldest residents. What they found was not a village of people heroically enduring old age. They found people who were, in the most immediate and observable sense, alive. Gardening at 95. Playing instruments at 102. Walking to the community center every morning to meet their friends, drinking tea, laughing, arguing, gossiping. Celebrating every birthday, every seasonal festival, every reason the calendar offered to gather together and eat and sing. People whose days were full and whose presence in those days was complete. People who, when asked what kept them going, didn't reach for abstract philosophy or recite medical wisdom. They said simply and in different words, "I have something to do. I have people who need me. I have a reason to get up in the morning." In Japanese, there is a word for that reason. Ikigai. It comes from two roots, iki, meaning life, and kai, meaning the realization of what one hopes for. Put together, a reason for being, a reason to live. And it is this concept, ancient, embedded deep in Japanese culture, practiced quietly in places like Ojimai for centuries without a name anyone thought to export, that this book is organized around. Ikigai. The Japanese Secret to a Long and Happy Life was written by Hector Garcia, a Spanish writer and blogger who has lived in Japan for more than a decade, and Francesc Miralles, a Catalan author and journalist who has written extensively on well-being and purpose. It was originally published in Spanish in 2016, translated into English in 2017, and became one of the most widely read books of the decade that followed, translated into more than 50 languages. Selling millions of copies, and generating a cultural conversation about purpose, longevity, and what it actually means to live well that has not yet quieted. The book is short, under 200 pages. It is also wide. In the span of those pages, it moves from Okinawan centenarians to Viktor Frankl's logotherapy, from Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's research on flow to the Japanese art of Morita therapy. From the specific dietary practices of Okinawa to the philosophical concepts of wabi-sabi, ichigo, and anti-fragility. It is, in some ways, more of a meditation than an argument, a gathering of related wisdom rather than a linear case being built. And it is most honest and most powerful when it is doing what it does best, letting the people of Ojimai speak in their own voices about their own lives. Let's walk through all of it. The full architecture of the book. Every concept the book is gathering toward. And then a full and honest critical examination of what this book gets right, where it falls short, and what the gap between the idea of Ikigai and the Western popularization of it means for how you receive what you're being told. Part 1. What Ikigai actually is, and the problem with the diagram before going further into the book's content. We need to spend real time on a question that turns out to matter more than most readers realize. What does Ikigai actually mean to Japanese people, as a concept lived from the inside? Because the answer to that question is significantly different from the way the word has been popularized in the West. And understanding the gap is essential to receiving the book honestly. In Japan, Ikigai is a word that most people use casually, naturally, the way you might use the word fulfillment or purpose in English. It is not necessarily a grand life mission. It is not the dramatic intersection of cosmic passion and world-changing vocation. It is, in the most immediate sense, whatever makes you feel that today was worth getting up for. That could be a cup of tea made exactly right in the morning, a conversation with a friend, a small project in the garden, the pleasure of skilled work, however modest, a child who needed something from you today. Ikigai, in the Japanese understanding, is intimate and ordinary and immediate, available in the texture of daily life, not only in the grand sweep of career and destiny.
Now,
There is a diagram that has become, in the West, almost inseparable from the word Ikigai. You have almost certainly seen it. 4 overlapping circles. What you love, what you are good at, what the world needs, what you can be paid for. Where all 4 circles overlap, that precise intersection, is labeled Ikigai. The diagram is striking. It is a useful framework for thinking about meaningful work. And here is something important that Garcia and Morales address honestly in their book, even as their work has been associated with the diagram in the popular imagination. This diagram is not Japanese. It was created by a Western writer named Mark Wynn in 2014, who combined a Venn diagram about purpose he had seen elsewhere with the word Ikigai, which he had encountered in a TED Talk by Dan Buettner on Blue Zones. The combination went viral. The diagram spread across the internet and was attributed to Japanese tradition by people who had no particular reason to question it. And because it was visually clean and conceptually appealing, it became the primary vehicle through which millions of people encountered the idea of Ikigai in a form that Japanese people themselves do not recognize as their own concept. Garcia and Morales did not create this diagram. Their book does describe Ikigai in terms of the intersection of passion, mission, vocation, and profession, which is related to the diagram's framework. But they are clear that the Japanese concept is both simpler and more immediate than the 4-circle intersection suggests. The Ajumai villager who has tended the same garden for 60 years, who has no particular passion for world-changing vocation but who feels, every morning, the pull of the soil and the satisfaction of growing food for their family, that person has Ikigai in the full, authentic sense. They have not found the intersection of 4 abstract categories. They have found the daily practice that makes their life feel worth living. And the difference matters enormously when you try to apply the concept to your own life. Part 2. The Blue Zones. Where long life is ordinary. The book opens by situating Okinawa within the broader framework of what researcher Dan Buettner called Blue Zones, 5 specific regions of the world, where people live measurably longer, healthier, and more engaged lives than the global average. These are Okinawa in Japan, Sardinia in Italy, Nicoya in Costa Rica, Icaria in Greece, and Loma Linda in California. What these 5 places share, despite their geographic and cultural differences, are a cluster of characteristics that the longevity research consistently identifies as the drivers of their extraordinary health outcomes. Strong social connection, the experience of genuine belonging, of being embedded in a community that notices your presence and would notice your absence. A primarily plant-based diet, rich in variety and modest in quantity. Regular, low-intensity physical activity woven into the fabric of daily life rather than separated into distinct exercise sessions. A sense of purpose, some reason to be alive that extends beyond personal pleasure and that orients each day towards something felt as meaningful. And a relationship with stress that is fundamentally different from the one most modern Westerners have, not the absence of difficulty, but a set of practices and attitudes that prevent difficulty from accumulating in the body as chronic, damaging physiological tension. Okinawa's version of these characteristics is the book's primary focus, and Okinawa's statistics are genuinely extraordinary. It has the highest concentration of centenarians in the world. Not just people who survive to 100, but people who are functional, engaged, socially active, and in many cases still working at 100. The rate of heart disease is dramatically lower than in the United States. The rates of many cancers are a fraction of Western levels. And these outcomes persist across generations that have maintained traditional Okinawan practices, though, as the book notes, younger generations of Okinawans who have adopted Westernized diets and lifestyles have begun to show dramatically different health trajectories, which is itself a piece of evidence about what is actually producing the longevity. Garcia and Morales drilled deeper than Okinawa as a whole, focusing their fieldwork on Ajumai specifically, the village of longevity, the place within the already exceptional context of Okinawa that is most exceptional. And what they find there is not a population following a longevity protocol. It is a population living, as they have always lived, with a quality of engagement and community and purpose that the researchers around them have been trying to understand for decades. Part 3. The Essence of Ikigai, 10 Rules from the World's Longest Living People from Their 100 Interviews in Ajumai. Garcia and Miralles distill what they present as the 10 rules of Ikigai, the practical principles that seem to animate the lives of the people they spoke with. These are not abstract philosophy. They are observable patterns drawn from actual lives. Let's walk through each. The first rule: stay active and don't retire. This is perhaps the most radical departure from the Western model of a good life. The cultural norm in most Western countries treats retirement as the goal, the reward you receive for decades of labor, the beginning of the leisure you've been working toward. The Ojimai centenarians have no equivalent concept. They do not stop working. They do not separate life into a period of obligation followed by a period of ease. They continue doing the things that give their days meaning and structure: gardening, cooking, fishing, making crafts, teaching, caring for others, because those activities are not the price they pay for a good life. They are the good life. The work is the Ikigai. Stopping it is not freedom. It is subtraction. The second rule: take it slow. The pace of life in Ojimai is genuinely different from the pace of life in Tokyo, in New York, in any of the cities where most modern people live. Not lazy, not unproductive, but unhurried. There is a distinction between being busy, which the Ojimai villagers are genuinely, fully busy with their gardens and their communities and their crafts, and being rushed, which they are not. The hurry that most modern people feel, the constant pressure of too many things competing for too little time, is largely absent. And Garcia and Miralles argue that this is not merely a pleasant side effect of village life. It is a health practice. Chronic hurry is a form of chronic stress, and chronic stress is one of the most reliably damaging things you can do to a human body over time. The third rule: don't fill your stomach. This is hara hachibiyu, the Okinawan dietary principle of stopping when you are 80% full. Garcia and Miralles give this significant attention because the science behind it is genuinely compelling. The brain's satiety signals lag behind actual fullness by roughly 15 to 20 minutes. By the time you consciously feel full, you have already eaten more than your body needed. Stopping at the point of near fullness rather than complete fullness is a simple, concrete, daily practice that produces significant differences in caloric intake and, the research suggests, in longevity outcomes. The Okinawan diet that accompanies this principle is also distinctive, primarily plant-based, built around green and yellow vegetables, whole grains, tofu, legumes, and small amounts of fish. Extremely low in sugar and processed food. And extraordinarily varied. Studies have found that Okinawans regularly consume more than 20 distinct plant foods per day. The fourth rule: surround yourself with good friends. The moai, the Okinawan concept of a stable, long-term social group of mutual support, is one of the most structurally important features of Ojimai life. A moai is an informal group, typically formed in childhood or early adulthood, of people with shared interests and mutual commitment to each other's well-being. They meet regularly, often daily. They share resources in times of need. They provide the kind of consistent, reliable, reciprocal social support that the research on longevity identifies as one of the most powerful predictors of both health and lifespan. Garcia and Miralles note, with evident concern, that the epidemic of loneliness in modern Western societies is the structural absence of exactly this. Not the absence of acquaintances or social media connections, but the absence of the stable, embedded, unconditional belonging that a moai represents. The fifth rule: get in shape for your next birthday. This is the book's formulation of the longevity research on physical activity, which consistently shows that the most important movement practice for long-term health is not intense exercise, but constant, gentle activity. The people of Ojimai walk. They garden. They do radio taiso, the gentle, structured morning stretching exercise that is a daily practice across much of Japan. They do not run marathons or lift heavy weights or attend high-intensity interval training classes. They move consistently and gently throughout the entire day because their daily life is structured in a way that makes constant movement natural and unavoidable. The sixth rule: smile. Garcia and Miralles present this with enough cultural context to give it weight. The emotional positivity of Ojimai residents is not performed cheerfulness or denial of difficulty. These are people who lived through the Battle of Okinawa, one of the bloodiest and most devastating military campaigns of the Second World War. which killed roughly a third of Okinawa's civilian population. They have known genuine loss and genuine hardship. The orientation toward positivity and away from prolonged negativity that the centenarians describe is a practiced, chosen orientation, not an absence of difficulty, but a specific way of relating to it. The seventh rule: reconnect with nature. The natural environment of Okinawa, the warm climate, the ocean, the agriculture that most Ojimai residents are directly connected to through their gardens, is not a backdrop to life there. It is woven into the fabric of daily existence. Garcia and Miralles connect this to what environmental psychologists call restorative attention, the specific kind of effortless, diffuse attention that natural environments invite and that allows the directed, effortful attention required for modern cognitive work to recover and replenish. The forest bathing practice of Shinrin-yoku, which has generated a substantial body of health research in Japan, is the explicit cultural formulation of what the Ojimai residents practice naturally as part of their daily lives. The eighth rule: give thanks. The gratitude practices of Ojimai are embedded in daily ritual, in the small ceremonies around food, in the way greetings are exchanged, in the communal celebrations that punctuate the calendar. Garcia and Miralles connect this to the substantial body of psychological research on gratitude, which consistently shows that the regular, deliberate acknowledgement of what is good in your life produces measurable changes in well-being, reduces the physiological stress response, and strengthens social bonds. It is not that gratitude is a technique the centenarians are applying. It is that gratitude is woven into the cultural fabric of their daily lives in ways that produce its effects without requiring any conscious effort. The ninth rule: live in the moment. Ichigo ichi. This moment exists only now and will not come again. This is one of the most beautiful concepts in the book and one of the most demanding. It is the practice of treating each encounter, each cup of tea, each conversation, each shared meal, as singular and irreplaceable. Not because dramatic importance is being attached to ordinary moments, but because the ordinary moments are seen clearly for what they actually are, the substance of a life. Not the interlude between important moments, the moments themselves. The 10th rule: follow your Ikigai. This is the integrating principle. All 9 of the preceding rules are expressions of, or pathways toward, the underlying orientation of having a reason to be alive that is immediate, personal, and daily. Not a grand destiny. Not an optimized life. A life in which what you are doing today connects, in felt and immediate ways, to what you care about most. Part 4. Logotherapy and Morita therapy. Purpose AS medicine. One of the most intellectually rich sections of the book is where Garcia and Miralles connect the Japanese concept of Ikigai to 2 distinct psychological traditions that, from opposite ends of the world, arrived at closely related insights about the relationship between meaning and health. The first is Viktor Frankl's logotherapy. Frankl was a Viennese psychiatrist who survived 4 Nazi concentration camps, including Auschwitz, and who emerged from that experience with a psychological framework built on a single foundational observation. Human beings can endure almost any suffering if they have a reason, a why, that makes the suffering meaningful. He had watched men in the camps who, by every external measure, had nothing left to live for, but who survived through the sustaining power of some purpose, a manuscript they intended to finish, a child they needed to return to, a responsibility they felt themselves to be the only one capable of fulfilling. And he watched men who had every material advantage over their companions but who died, not from illness or violence, but from what he could only describe as the loss of will to live. The absence of meaning, Frankl argued, and then spent his career demonstrating, is itself a form of illness. And the restoration of meaning is, in many cases, a form of medicine. Garcia and Miralles present Frankl's key distinction, which maps directly onto the Japanese understanding of Ikigai, between pleasure and meaning. Pleasure is immediate, self-referential, and ultimately unsatisfying as a primary aim. The pursuit of pleasure as life's primary goal is, paradoxically, one of the most reliable paths to unhappiness. Because pleasure habituates rapidly and requires constant escalation to produce the same effect. Meaning is other-directed, often deferred in its rewards and cumulative rather than habituating. The meaningful life, the life organized around something beyond personal gratification, is both in Frankel's clinical observation and in the epidemiological research on the Ajumai centenarians. Also the longer and more vital life. Morita therapy is less well known outside Japan, but equally relevant to Ikigai. Developed by Shoma Morita, a Japanese psychiatrist and Buddhist practitioner working in the early 20th century, it was designed to address neurosis, OCD, and anxiety, but from a starting point radically different from Western psychotherapy. Where Western approaches to anxiety have tended to focus on eliminating or reducing the anxiety itself, Morita argued that the attempt to eliminate anxiety is precisely what perpetuates and amplifies it. The donkey that is tied to a post by a rope keeps walking in circles trying to free itself, becoming more entangled with each attempt. The same dynamic operates in the anxious person who tries to suppress, argue away, or escape their anxiety. Morita's approach is acceptance-based. Feel what you feel, fully and without resistance. Don't try to change the feeling. Don't try to understand its origins. Simply accept its presence, allow it to be there without fighting it, and then, and this is the crucial turn, do what you need to do anyway. Not because the feeling is gone. Because the feeling is not the obstacle you thought it was. The Morita framework is accept feelings, know your purpose, and do what the situation requires. Which is, Garcia and Miralles note, essentially the same prescription as Ikigai, delivered through clinical language rather than cultural practice. Part 5. Flow. The state where Ikigai lives, perhaps the most psychologically developed section of the book, is its treatment of flow, the concept developed by Hungarian-American psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi through decades of research on optimal human experience. Garcia and Miralles devote substantial space to this because flow is, in their framing, the experiential state where Ikigai is most fully expressed. It is the state where you're most alive. Csikszentmihalyi conducted thousands of interviews across cultures and professions, asking people to describe the moments when they felt most engaged, most energized, most genuinely themselves. The answers across all of this diversity were strikingly convergent. People described moments of deep absorption in challenging, skilled activity, moments when the sense of a separate self doing something dissolved into the activity itself. The chess player who is no longer a person playing chess, but is simply the game, thinking and responding without the overlay of self-consciousness. The surgeon whose hands know what to do without the conscious mind's narration. The musician who is no longer playing the music, but is the music. The gardener. And here the connection to Ajumai is direct and immediate, who is so completely present to the garden that there is no gap between gardener and garden. Flow arises, Csikszentmihalyi found, at the intersection of challenge and skill. The activity needs to be difficult enough to require your full capacity, easy enough to allow the possibility of genuine engagement, hard enough to demand genuine effort. When challenge significantly exceeds skill, you get anxiety. When skill significantly exceeds challenge, you get boredom. In the narrow band where they are matched, where you are working at the edge of your current ability, flow becomes available. Garcia and Miralles make a point here that is both simple and important. The activities that produce flow for any given person are not random. They are reliable. If you pay attention to the moments when you lose track of time, when the self-consciousness drops away, when you are most completely present, these moments are pointing directly at your Ikigai. Not at a career category or a professional identity. At the specific, concrete activities in which your nature is most fully expressed. And those activities, whatever they are worth organizing as much of your life around as possible. They also introduce the concept of microflow, which is, in many ways, the concept most directly applicable to the Ajumai way of life. Microflow is the quality of absorbed engagement that can be brought to the smallest and most ordinary activities. The way a skilled cook approaches the preparation of a simple meal. The deliberateness with which a tea ceremony participant moves through each gesture. The presence that an Ajumai gardener brings to an ordinary morning in the vegetable plot. The principle is that the activities themselves are less important than the quality of attention brought to them. Which means that Ikigai is not waiting for you in some grand and distant future achievement. It is available in the quality of your attention to whatever you are doing right now. Part 6. The Centenarians Speak. Voices from Ajimai. The most immediately moving section of the book is the direct reporting from Ajimai, the actual words of the actual centenarians and supercentenarians that Garcia and Miralles interviewed. These are not representatives of a philosophical position. They are specific human beings who have lived extraordinarily long and full lives and who, when asked about it, answer with a specificity and a warmth that no amount of research summary can replicate. A woman of 101 who tends her own garden every morning, who says that her Ikigai is her daily cup of green tea and the flower beds she has maintained for 60 years. A man of 98 who still walks to the community center every day to meet his friends, who says that the friends are what keep him going, that without them he would have no reason to get up. A woman of 103 who credits her longevity to the singing she does with her Moai group 3 times a week and to the fact that she has never, in her entire life, eaten anything she didn't enjoy. A man of 97 who says, with complete simplicity, that he has never thought about his age, that age has never seemed to him like a thing worth thinking about, because there is always something to do today. These voices are the heart of the book. They are also, quietly, a corrective to any temptation to over-philosophize what they are describing. The people of Ajimai are not practicing Ikigai. They are living it. The concept is not a framework they apply to their lives. It is what their lives look like from the outside when a researcher with a notebook is trying to understand what is producing the extraordinary results the data keeps showing. The authors also note something that resists easy articulation but that the interviews consistently return to. The people of Ajimai do not seem to be striving. They are not optimizing. They are not pursuing longevity as a goal. They are doing the things they love, with the people they love, in the place they belong, and the longevity is what happens when that is your life, sustained across decades, with the support of a community that makes the same choices and provides the context for them to be sustained. Part 7. The Body, Diet, Movement, and the Physical Practice of Longevity. Garcia and Miralles are careful to present the physical practices of Ajimai life not as a separate category from the spiritual and psychological ones but as expressions of the same underlying orientation. The body and the spirit are not separate in the Okinawan understanding of health. What you eat, how you move, how much you sleep, how you relate to your physical environment, these are not health maintenance tasks appended to a life of meaning. They are part of the integrated practice of living well. The Okinawan diet deserves more than a passing mention because the research on it is genuinely extraordinary. It is built around a foundation of plant foods, primarily green and yellow vegetables, sweet potatoes, which are the staple starch, not white rice as in mainland Japan, tofu, legumes, seaweed, and small amounts of fish. Okinawans eat, by Western standards, very small quantities of food, an average of around 1,800 calories per day, well below Western averages, consistent with the Hara Hachibiyu principle of stopping at 80% fullness. The diversity of plant foods they eat is exceptional. Researchers have found that traditional Okinawan diets regularly include more than 20 distinct plant species per day, with a wide variety of natural antioxidants, polyphenol, and other protective compounds. The research on caloric restriction and longevity is one of the most robust in aging science. Across multiple animal models and now in human observational data, consistently eating slightly less than full capacity is associated with reduced markers of oxidative stress, improved metabolic function, and extended healthy lifespan. The Okinawans have been practicing this inadvertently through cultural convention rather than scientific knowledge for generations. On movement, Garcia and Miralles are emphatic about something that contradicts the dominant fitness culture of most Western countries. Intense exercise is not the key to the Ajimai centenarians' physical vitality. They do not run. They do not lift weights. They do not attend fitness classes. They walk, everywhere, every day, at a gentle pace that keeps their cardiovascular and musculoskeletal systems active without the inflammatory stress that intense exercise can produce in aging bodies. They practice radio taiso, the gentle morning stretching routine. They garden, which involves sustained light physical activity across multiple muscle groups. They dance at community celebrations. The research on this pattern is consistent and important. Regular, low-intensity movement sustained throughout the day is associated with better long-term health outcomes than high-intensity exercise performed in discrete sessions surrounded by prolonged sitting. The person who walks for 20 minutes 3 times a day, every day for 40 years, is doing more for their longevity than the person who runs a marathon once a year. Movement as a way of life, embedded in the structure of daily existence rather than extracted into separate sessions, is the physical expression of Ikigai. Part 8. Wabi-sabi, Ikigai, and resilience. Japanese wisdom for impermanence. The final substantial philosophical section of the book addresses the cluster of Japanese concepts around impermanence, imperfection, and resilience. These are ideas that Garcia and Miralles present as essential to the emotional sustaining of an Ikigai-oriented life, because a life organized around meaning and purpose will inevitably encounter loss, setback, and the gradual diminishment that time brings to everything. The question is not whether difficulty will come. It is how you meet it when it arrives. Wabi-sabi is the Japanese aesthetic and philosophical concept of finding beauty in imperfection and impermanence. It is a concept with deep roots in Zen Buddhist aesthetics, the cracked tea bowl that has been repaired with gold, the moss-covered stone, the face marked by decades of experience. Wabi-sabi does not seek to minimize or deny the fact of aging and decay. It finds in them a specific kind of beauty that perfection cannot offer, the beauty of things that have been genuinely lived in, genuinely used, genuinely marked by their passage through time. The wrinkle-free face of a person who has not yet encountered life is beautiful. So, differently, is the face of the Ajumai centenarian who has encountered everything that 100 years contains. The beauty is of a different kind, richer in some ways for what it has survived. Garcia and Miralles connect wabi-sabi directly to the psychological health of the Ajumai centenarians, who seem, in their interviews, to have genuinely made peace with the impermanence that most people spend enormous psychological energy resisting. They do not appear to be fighting their age. They are not pretending to be younger than they are. They are, instead, inhabiting their actual age with a completeness and ease that people in midlife who are desperately resisting the signs of aging almost never achieve. Ichigo, this moment exists only now and will not come again, is the concept of radical present moment singularity. Each encounter with another person, each experience, each conversation is unrepeatable. This specific version of this moment, the particular light, the particular words, the particular presence of the particular people in it, exists once and then is gone forever. Ichigo is the practice of treating each moment as if you know this to be true, which you do. The Japanese tea ceremony is perhaps its most formalized expression. Every aspect of the ceremony, the arrangement of the flowers, the choice of the bowl, the precise movements of the host, is performed with the knowledge that this exact ceremony, with these exact people, in this exact configuration, will never occur again. The result is not solemnity but aliveness, the specific quality of attention that comes from genuinely inhabiting the singularity of what is actually happening. On anti-fragility, borrowed from Nassim Nicholas Taleb, Garcia and Miralles present the concept as the deepest level of the resilience orientation. Things that are fragile break under stress. Things that are robust survive it. Things that are anti-fragile, and the centenarians of Ajumai exemplify this, actually become stronger through difficulty. They have been tested, repeatedly and genuinely, across lives that have included war, loss, poverty, illness, and the deaths of people they loved. And they have not merely survived. They have become more themselves, more settled in their Ikigai, more genuinely connected to what matters, more at ease in the impermanence that used to frighten them. The difficulty was not incidental to who they became. It was the medium in which they became it. Part 9. The 10 Rules of Ikigai. Synthesis. Garcia and Miralles conclude with what they call the 10 Rules of Ikigai, a synthesis of everything the book has gathered toward, expressed in the most concrete and actionable form they can find. We have encountered most of these through the book's journey, but it is worth stating them together as a complete picture. Stay active and don't retire. Take it slow. Don't fill your stomach. Surround yourself with good friends. Get in shape for your next birthday. Smile. Reconnect with nature. Give thanks. Live in a moment. And follow your Ikigai. These are not a productivity system. They are not a morning routine or a habit stack or a self-improvement protocol. They are, in aggregate, a description of what a life organized around daily meaning looks like when it is actually lived, drawn not from the imagination of the authors, but from the actual practices of people who have demonstrated, with their extraordinary longevity and their evident vitality, that they are doing something right. The authors add one final formulation that stays with many readers. If you don't know what your Ikigai is yet, don't worry. That is okay. The Ajamai villagers themselves advise against anxious searching. Your Ikigai is not a treasure you find by hunting for it. It is something that emerges from paying attention to what you're already doing, to the moments when you are most engaged, most absorbed, most genuinely present. It is already there, in the texture of your daily life, waiting not to be discovered like a hidden object, but to be recognized like a familiar face you had somehow stopped seeing. The critique, where Ikigai distorts, romanticizes, and earns honest scrutiny, now let us be genuinely honest. Because this book, despite its real beauty and its genuine wisdom, has specific and significant problems that deserve careful naming. And because the popularity of the book, the speed with which it spread, and the scale of the cultural conversation it entered, makes the critical engagement more important, not less. Let's begin with the most fundamental issue, which we touched on at the start and need to return to with full seriousness. The gap between authentic Japanese Ikigai and the version the book popularizes in the West is larger than the book acknowledges. Japanese scholars and cultural commentators have noted repeatedly, with varying degrees of exasperation, that the Western popularization of Ikigai, including the book's version of it, has drifted significantly from what the concept actually means in Japanese daily life. In Japan, as multiple researchers have documented, Ikigai is not primarily about finding the perfect intersection of passion, vocation, mission, and profession. It is not a career development framework. It is not even necessarily connected to work at all. Japanese psychologist Michiko Kumano, who has studied Ikigai extensively, has found that when Japanese people describe their own Ikigai, they most commonly point to relationships, their children, their friends, their community. They point to small daily pleasures. They point to moments of connection and beauty and simple enjoyment. The concept is immediate, relational, and ordinary in ways that the book's framing, and especially the viral four-circle diagram that has attached itself to the book in the Western popular imagination, does not quite capture. This matters practically because the Western reader who takes the book at face value may conclude that they need to find a grand, unified life purpose that simultaneously expresses their passion, serves the world, and pays well, and that without this specific intersection, they lack Ikigai. This is both psychologically taxing and culturally foreign to what the concept actually means in Japan. The pressure to identify your Ikigai understood as a life mission is almost the opposite of the unhurried, humble, daily orientation that the Ajamai centenarians actually embody. Second, the book's treatment of Okinawa and Ajamai, while grounded in genuine fieldwork and genuinely respectful in its intentions, contains elements of what scholars call Orientalism, the Western tendency to exoticize and simplify non-Western cultures in ways that serve Western imaginative needs more than they accurately represent the cultures in question. The portrait of Ajamai as a kind of timeless sanctuary of ancient wisdom, untouched by the complications of modernity, is not entirely accurate. Okinawa is a complex, historically rich, and in many ways deeply troubled place. It bears the ongoing burden of U.S. military bases that occupy a disproportionate share of its land. It has a history of invasion and cultural suppression by mainland Japan, and its younger generations are navigating the same tensions between traditional and modern life that most societies face. None of this appears in the book. The effect is a portrait of Ajamai that functions more as a projection screen for Western anxieties about modern life than as a genuinely complete picture of a real place. The Ajamai of this book is the Ajamai that modern Westerners, exhausted by busyness and loneliness and meaninglessness, need to exist. A place where ancient wisdom has produced a radically better way of living, proof that another way is possible. This need is real. But need is not a reliable guide to accurate representation. And the book would be more honest and more genuinely useful if it acknowledged the complexity of the place it is using as its primary evidence. Third, the longevity science is real, but the causal relationships are more complex than the book presents. The Blue Zones research, the evidence that Okinawa and the other zones produce extraordinary health outcomes, is genuine and well documented. But the specific causal mechanism that produces those outcomes is genuinely complex and not fully understood. Garcia and Miralles argue, in effect, that Ikigai, the having of a daily reason for being, is the central causal factor. The research supports purpose as one significant variable. It does not support it as the primary or sufficient cause. Okinawan longevity is almost certainly the product of a confluence of factors that include genetics, the specific nutritional composition of the traditional diet, the low caloric density eating patterns, the constant gentle movement, the social embeddedness of the moai structure, the low-stress pace of life, the natural environment, and yes, the sense of purpose that Ikigai represents. Isolating any one of these as the key and exporting it to a Western context without the others is unlikely to produce equivalent outcomes. A person who finds their Ikigai while continuing to eat a processed Western diet, work 60-hour weeks in social isolation, and live in a built environment that requires a car to move from point to point is not going to achieve Okinawan health outcomes. The book is honest, in places, about the multifactorial nature of the evidence. But its title and framing imply a single key solution that the research does not support. Fourth, the book's structure is genuinely scattered in a way that its brevity partially conceals, but that the careful reader notices. In less than 200 pages, Garcia and Miralles move through Blue Zones research, logotherapy, Morita therapy, flow theory, centenarian interviews, Okinawan diet science, movement research, wabi-sabi philosophy, Ichigo, Nassim Taleb's anti-fragility, and the 10 rules of Ikigai. Each of these topics has a rich and complex literature behind it. Each is presented in the book at a level of depth appropriate to a magazine article rather than to a serious examination. The book has the quality of a highly intelligent tour through interconnected ideas rather than a rigorous engagement with any of them. This is not disqualifying. The tour is enjoyable and the connections being drawn are genuine. But readers who expect the depth of engagement that the book's subject matter and reputation might imply will find it somewhat thin. Fifth, the advice about flow and Ikigai, while philosophically sound, offers limited practical guidance for people whose lives and circumstances make it genuinely difficult to organize daily existence around the activities that produce absorption and meaning. The Ajamai centenarian who grows vegetables and meets with friends every morning has the full support of a community, a climate, a cultural tradition, and a way of life that makes those practices natural and self-sustaining. The person in a dense urban environment working a demanding job with young children and financial pressures and limited time is not in equivalent circumstances. The gap between find the activities that produce flow and build your life around them and the actual practical steps for doing this in a complex modern life is not bridged by the book. The wisdom is real. The translation assistance is minimal. Sixth and finally, the book is in some ways as much about the Western longing for a simpler, more purposeful way of living as it is about Japan. This is not a critique of Garcia and Miralles personally. They are thoughtful, evidently genuine researchers who spent real time in Ajamai and who write with evident care and respect for the people they encountered. But the book they have produced lands in a specific cultural moment, the early 21st century crisis of meaning in wealthy, individualistic, technologically accelerated societies, and it speaks to that moment with a warmth and accessibility that is partly the product of telling people what they need to hear, in a form they are prepared to receive, using the authority of an ancient culture that seems to have figured out what the modern world has lost. This is, in many ways, what good popular writing does. It finds the right container for genuine wisdom and makes that wisdom available to people who need it. But it also means that the book's portrait of Ikigai is shaped, at least in part, by what its audience is hungry for. And an audience that is hungry for simplicity, for community, for the sense that a quieter and more purposeful life is achievable, that audience may not be best served by a portrait that is somewhat more straightforward than the full reality of what it is describing. Final thoughts. Let's end where the book itself most powerfully ends, not in the 10 rules or the philosophy, but in the specific faces and voices of the Ajumai centenarians. In the woman who still dances at 102. In the man who still meets his friends every morning at 98. In the 100-year-old who said, when asked the secret of her long life, that she had never once eaten anything she didn't enjoy. What these lives are pointing toward is not a technique or a system or a cultural export. They are pointing toward something much simpler and much more demanding, a life that is genuinely organized around what actually matters to you, in the company of people who genuinely matter to you, with enough presence and enough slowness to actually feel it while it is happening. This is Ikigai in its most authentic form. Not a diagram, not a career framework, not the intersection of 4 abstract circles. A daily reason to get up. A practice that connects you to what you love. People who need you and whom you need. Work, however humble, that carries the sense of being genuinely yours. The Okinawan proverb that Garcia and Miralles quote near the book's close is the best summary of everything the centenarians are trying to tell us. Only by staying active will you want to live 100 years. Not by solving the puzzle of your purpose once and for all. By continuing to be engaged every morning in the particular, specific, irreplaceable activities that make your day feel worth beginning. Your Ikigai is not waiting for you at the end of a grand philosophical journey. It is probably already in your life, in forms you have been too busy or too distracted or too focused on larger questions to fully recognize. Pay attention to what absorbs you. Pay attention to who you feel most alive around. Pay attention to the moments when time disappears and you are simply, completely, here. That noticing is where it begins. The rest is already yours.